Welcome to Aircraft, your gateway to thrilling HFY sci-fi stories where humanity stands strong among the stars. Here, you'll experience epic encounters with alien civilizations, moments of human courage, intelligence, and the unstoppable spirit that makes humanity unique. Every story on this channel is narrated by a real human voice, not AI, bringing you a more authentic and immersive storytelling experience. If you love sci-fi adventures and stories where humanity proves its worth in the universe, you're in the right place. Let's start the story.
I am Kreth Saul, third-rank observer of the Krell continuance, and I am going to be honest with you. I did not expect to survive this. Not because I am a coward. Krell do not produce cowards. We are a species born in pressure, shaped by deep water, hardened by the kind of gravity that would flatten most sentient life into a thin and unremarkable paste. We are dense. We are slow. We are difficult to kill. These are facts about us that we wear with quiet pride, the way old soldiers wear scars. But pride does not stop a station from dying. The Verath 9 orbital mining platform had been falling for 6 hours by the time the Verk finished cutting through the secondary docking collar and poured themselves inside. 6 hours of slow, grinding descent into the upper atmospheric bands of the gas giant below us. A planet with no name, only a catalog number, only a color, which was the particular shade of brown that means you will not survive entry. The station groaned around us constantly. A low structural moan, like something enormous slowly admitting defeat. Gravity plating was failing in sections. This was the detail that mattered most. In the forward observation deck, you weighed nothing. In the cargo corridors near the lower rings, you weighed approximately 3 times what you should. The sections in between shifted without warning, dropping or surging as conduits blew and rerouted and blew again. Walking through the station was like walking through the mood of a dying god, unpredictable, violent, deeply uninterested in your survival. The Verk had boarded because this was an opportunity. That is how they think, not in terms of territory or resources or ideology, purely in terms of opportunity. They are long, they are fast. They have no skeleton in the way most species understand the word, just dense muscle wrapped around a flexible core. Bodies that evolved in the void between asteroids, perfectly calibrated for zero gravity. In open space, they are nearly impossible to fight. In a tumbling, broken station with failing gravity, they saw, correctly, an advantage. What they did not account for was the humans. There were 11 of them aboard Verath 9 when the Verk cut through. A maintenance and extraction crew, mid-rotation, not a military unit, not a combat posting. Their commander was a woman named Sergeant Dana Voss, which meant she was the ranking security officer for a crew of miners and technicians, which meant she was essentially a single soldier responsible for people whose primary qualification was knowing how to operate heavy drilling equipment. When the Verk boarded, the humans went silent. Comms cut, locator signals dropped, no distress calls, no movement signatures, nothing. My unit, 8 Krell soldiers, myself included, had been sheltering in the mid-ring maintenance hub since the first breach alarm sounded. Our commanding officer, Sub-Marshal Den, had assessed the situation with the characteristic Krell thoroughness. He reviewed the Verk boarding numbers. He reviewed the station's structural integrity reports. He reviewed the last known positions of the human crew. Then he said very quietly, "The humans are dead." I recorded this in my log. I noted the time. I noted my own assessment, which agreed with his. We were wrong within the hour. She came out of a corridor that should not have been passable. Section 7 of the mid-ring had suffered a gravity plating cascade failure 40 minutes prior. We knew this because our equipment told us, and because one of our soldiers, Breck, a good soldier, solid, reliable, had attempted to cross it during our initial sweep, and been thrown immediately into the ceiling with enough force to crack 2 of his dorsal plates. He was alive. He was also done moving for the foreseeable future. We had marked Section 7 as impassable and moved around it. A long detour, 20 minutes of corridor that should have taken 4. the human walked out of Section 7 like she was stepping off a transport ramp. She was low, crouched almost. Her center of gravity dropped in a way that looked at first like injury. Her left arm was pressed against the wall, not gripping it, just touching it, fingers trailing lightly across the surface as she moved. Her eyes were moving constantly, not in panic, something else. She was reading the corridor the way Krell read deep water, feeling for currents, for pressure changes, for the thing that was about to shift. She was not injured. I revised this assessment approximately 3 seconds after making it, when she stopped walking, turned her head 40 degrees and said, without looking at us, "Don't raise the weapons. I've got 6 Verk between you and the cargo bay, and I need them to keep thinking this section is empty." Submarshal Den raised his weapon. "I said don't," she said, still not looking. Her voice had the particular flatness of someone who is not giving a suggestion. Den lowered his weapon. I noted this in my log. I noted that Den had not lowered his weapon for anyone in 11 years of service. I did not have a probability model for what was currently happening, so I began building one. Initial estimate: human survival probability, 12%. Revised upward from 0% upon confirmation she was alive. Immediately questioned upon seeing the condition of the corridor she had just walked through. She turned and looked at us. Human faces are difficult for Krell to read, too mobile, too many small muscles doing too many small things at once. But even I could read the particular expression she wore. It was the expression of someone who has already made all the decisions and is now simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. "Sergeant Dana Voss," she said, "I've got 9 crew alive. I need your soldiers." She glanced at Breck, who was propped against the wall, dorsal plates cracked, thoroughly out of the fight. "The ones who can still move." "The Verk number at least 30, Den said. 34, she corrected. 2 Apex class. I've already dealt with one of them. Silence. How, Den asked. "Gravity," she said, and walked back toward Section 7. "Follow me and stay low. I mean it about staying low. If you stand up straight in the transition zone between plates 7 and 9, you'll hit a sheer pocket and your insides will rearrange themselves." She paused. "That's not a metaphor." I stayed low. Every Krell in our unit stayed low. Revised human survival probability, 31%. I was still catastrophically wrong. The cargo bay was enormous. The way all mining platform cargo bays are enormous. Built to hold equipment, not people. Designed for machines that didn't care about atmosphere or comfort or the ambient sound of a station slowly tearing itself apart. The ceiling was 30 meters up. The floor was stacked with drilling rigs, ore processing units, and magnetic containment frames, all lashed down with industrial cable that hummed under tension. The humans were everywhere, not scattered, positioned. A technician named Rolf sat perfectly still on top of a drilling rig 15 meters up, which should have been impossible given that the gravity plating beneath him was rated at approximately 1.8 standard. He was not holding on. He was reading something on a hand terminal, relaxed, as though he were sitting in a cafeteria. He glanced down when we entered, gave a short nod to Voss, and went back to his terminal. 2 more humans, a woman named Chen and a man named Tors, were working on a gravity plating junction box near the far wall. Not repairing it, modifying it. The Krell technician in my unit, Pell, moved toward them instinctively, professionally, the way any technical mind moves toward an interesting problem, and then stopped and stared. "They've isolated the plating sections," Pell said quietly. "They can trigger them independently." "We know," said Chen without looking up. "You've created variable gravity pockets," Pell said. "Localized, controllable." "We know," said Tors. "If you trigger a high-gravity pulse in an enclosed space with a Verk inside." "We know," said Voss from behind us. I looked at the bay, really looked at it. The drilling rigs were not randomly positioned. The containment frames created channels, corridors within the larger space, funnels that led from the 3 entry points toward the center of the bay. The cables were strung at specific heights. The whole structure was a maze, and the maze had a purpose I was only beginning to understand. The Verk were built for open space. Long bodies, no skeleton, pure reflex and muscle memory calibrated for zero-G in open space. They were almost impossible to grab, to strike, to corner. They moved in 3 dimensions the way most species move in 2. A corridor fight against a Verk was not a fair fight under any circumstances. Unless the corridor kept changing. Unless the gravity in that corridor could, at any moment, double, or vanish, or slam sideways. Unless the creatures pouring through your door had spent their entire evolutionary history in environments where gravity was a constant 0, and therefore had no instinct, none, not a single reflex, not a muscle memory, for dealing with the moment it wasn't. They can't adapt, I said. I was talking to myself. I do this sometimes. Voss heard me anyway. Nobody can adapt to something they've never felt, she said. That's the whole point. Submarshal Den looked at the bay for a long moment. Then he looked at Voss. You've done this before, he said. It was not a question. Not this exactly, she said, but close enough. She checked something on her wrist unit. They'll breach the cargo bay in about 4 minutes. I need your soldiers on the upper rig stay above plate boundary 7. Don't cross into the marked zones, and don't try to be clever about the gravity shifts because you will get it wrong and I will not be able to help you. She said all of this at the pace of someone reading a checklist. Questions. Den had 7 questions. He asked none of them. Good, Voss said, and turned to face the main cargo door. Revised human survival probability, 67%. The Verk came through all 3 entry points simultaneously. This was tactically correct. This was exactly what you would do against a cornered enemy in an enclosed space, split attention, divide response, overwhelmed from multiple angles. Against almost any opponent in almost any environment, this would have worked. The first Verk through the main door crossed into a gravity pocket that Voss triggered manually from the control unit strapped to her left forearm. The pocket was 2.4 standard gravity, localized to a space roughly 3 meters in diameter, and the Verk hit it like it had hit a wall made of atmosphere. Its long body, 2 meters of dense muscle and reflex that had never, not once in its entire existence, been asked to carry its own weight, buckled at the midsection, and drove it into the floor with a crack that I heard from 20 meters away. It was not dead. Verk are difficult to kill, but it was not moving quickly, and in this context, not moving quickly was the same as dead. The 2 Verk behind it hesitated. This was the first mistake I had ever seen a Verk make, and I have studied Verk combat extensively. Hesitation is not something Verk do. Their entire predatory instinct is forward motion, forward always, because in 0 gravity, stopping means losing momentum, and losing momentum means losing the hunt. But the creature that had just slammed into the floor sent a signal their evolution had no category for, and their bodies responded with the only thing available. Pause. The pause lasted approximately 1 second. Marcus Webb came out of the upper rigs during that second. Webb was the crew's heavy equipment operator, which meant he was large, which meant the 1.8 gravity up on the rigs had not slowed him down the way it slowed most humans, which meant when he dropped off the rig and hit the transition zone between plates, where gravity briefly dropped to 0.3 standard, he was moving fast, very fast. He crossed 15 meters of cargo bay in a trajectory that should not have been possible and hit the first hesitating Verk with a hydraulic pry bar at a speed that I did not have instruments to measure precisely, but which my body registered as unreasonable. The Verk went sideways into a containment frame. Webb was already past it, feet finding the floor, low, knees bent. His weight distributed in the particular way that Voss had shown us. The way that meant the gravity shifts landing beneath him only added to his momentum instead of stealing it. They're bunching at entry 2, a voice crackled on comms. Rolf, still on his rig, reading the sensor display on his terminal like he was monitoring ore extraction rates. 4 of them, trying to go high. Going high was the Verk instinct. In zero gravity, altitude is advantage. Up is away from threats, up is speed, up is escape. The Verk pouring through entry 2 surged toward the ceiling. Chen triggered plate boundary 4. Gravity in the upper third of the bay jumped to 3.1 standard. 4 Verk dropped out of the air like they had been swatted. Revised human survival probability, 79%. Revised immediately to 84% when Webb took a glancing strike from a Verk's tail and did not appear to notice. I watched Webb run a Verk in full retreat across the floor of the cargo bay. Across the wall, gravity dropping to near zero in the transition, and then across the ceiling as the plating surged upward. The Verk fleeing on pure reflex in the direction that should have been away from danger, directly into the high-gravity trap that Tors had prepared on the far end of the ceiling. The Verk hit the pocket and dropped. Webb watched it fall with an expression that the Krell language does not have a word for. The closest translation is something like satisfied contempt. But that is not quite right. It is the expression of someone who has made a thing happen that they knew would happen, and are acknowledging that they were correct, without particular excitement, because they were always going to be correct. He moved to the next one. Entry 3, Voss said quietly. 2 coming in low, they're learning. She said this without alarm. The Verk learning that high was dangerous and therefore going low. This was, apparently, something she had planned for. I noted in my log that I had been treating the humans as improvising. I revised this assessment entirely. It came through the main cargo door 17 minutes into the engagement, and I understood immediately why Voss had said 2 Apex class with the particular tone she had used. Not fear, not respect. The tone of someone who has already accounted for a variable and is waiting for it to arrive on schedule. The Apex class Verk is not simply a large Verk. It is a different category of problem. 3 meters of muscle that has had centuries of apex predator selection applied to it. Reflexes that most species cannot perceive as individual movements. A body so calibrated for 3-dimensional movement that watching it navigate even a gravity-affected space was deeply unsettling. It moved through the cargo bay like it was reading the gravity shifts before they happened, adjusting, compensating, not thriving in the environment but not failing in it either. It was adapting. It's learning faster than the others, Rolf said from his rig, his voice carrying the mild interest of a man who has noticed an unusual geological formation. Yes, said Voss. That's a problem. Yes, said Voss. She was already moving. This is the thing I could not adequately explain to my superiors later when filing my observer report. The thing they asked me to clarify 3 separate times because my description did not match their models of human physical capability. Voss moved through the cargo bay's shifting gravity, the way the Apex moved through zero-G, not fighting, not compensating for it, not thinking about it. The shifts were information to her. Every change in the plating beneath her feet told her something, and her body responded before her conscious mind could have processed the data. She was not matching the Apex. She was using something it did not have. The Apex closed the distance fast, lunging through a low-gravity transition that should have given it a speed advantage, its body extending to full length in the brief weightlessness. Voss dropped, not away, toward the floor, flat, immediately, in the way that someone drops when they know exactly how much space is above them, and have calculated that the space below is safe, and the space above is not. The Apex passed over her. In zero gravity, this would have been the ideal outcome for the Apex. It would have used the overshoot to arc back, to reorient in 3 dimensions, to come back from an angle she couldn't anticipate. Gravity did not give it the arc. Gravity gave it the floor. The Apex hit the deck and found its footing in one standard, Earth standard, As it happened, the precise gravity setting the human crew had quietly normalized across the center of the cargo bay during the setup, so gradually the apex had moved into it without triggering its pressure sensors. In one standard, an Apex-class Verk's body is carrying approximately 4 times its evolutionary load-bearing expectation. It can move, it can fight, but it is not fast. Voss was already standing. She had a shape in her hand that I identified after a half-second delay as a gravity anchor, a small device, mining equipment, designed to create a localized artificial gravity point for securing loose equipment in variable G environments. Civilian equipment, not a weapon. She threw it, not at the apex, past it. The anchor attached to the far wall activated and pulled. The localized gravity field it generated was not powerful, 0.8 standard, directional, a gentle insistence rather than a command. In a normal situation, a creature the size of the apex would barely register it. The apex was already in one standard, already carrying 4 times its preferred load, already oriented wrongly, landing reflex misfiring, body spending resources on staying upright that it had never in its evolutionary history been asked to spend. The 0.8 directional pull from the anchor was not powerful. It did not need to be. It needed only to be the final variable in an equation that Voss had written before the apex came through the door, and the apex had solved the equation for her by walking into the cargo bay. The apex leaned, just slightly, involuntarily, a half-degree-less toward the anchor's pull. Voss hit it, not with a weapon, with herself low, shoulder forward, driving into the apex's center of mass at the precise moment its weight distribution was wrong, adding to the lean, compounding the error, using the full weight of her body and the full cooperation of gravity in a move that my Krell physiology textbooks would classify as tactically insane given the size differential. The apex went down. She triggered Chen's panel before it could rise. The gravity pocket that snapped into existence around the down apex was 4.2 standard. I know this because Pell told me, in the voice of someone watching a very complicated piece of machinery do exactly what it was built to do and finding the precision almost offensive. 4.2 standard gravity holds a Verk apex flat. It holds it flat the way deep water holds a stone, not with violence, not with force, simply with the patient and absolute insistence of physics that has never in its history been negotiable. The apex struggled. It struggled the way all things struggle when they encounter, for the first time, a force that did not exist in any environment their species has ever occupied. Without framework, without instinct, without a single piece of muscle memory that applied to this exact problem. Voss stepped out of the pocket, smoothed her jacket, and spoke into her comms. Tors, close entry 3. Webb, fall back to the secondary position. Rolf, I need a count. 11 down, Rolf said. 7 withdrew after the ceiling dropped. Remaining apex is pinned. The rest, a brief pause, they're pulling back to the breach point. Voss nodded once. She looked at the pinned apex. It looked back at her with the particular expression that I later spent considerable time trying to classify, and eventually decided was the Verk equivalent of encountering something for which no category exists. Not fear, not defeat, something prior to both of those things. Recognition. Submarshal, Voss said, without turning around. Den was standing 3 meters behind me. He had not moved in 11 minutes. Your people need to hold the breach corridor, she said. Can you do that? Den looked at the apex. He looked at the bay around him, the channels, the cables, the rigged plating sections, the 9 humans moving through a field of variable gravity like they were walking through a park. Yes, he said. Good. Voss finally looked at him. The mobile human face arranged itself into something that my translation matrix classified as professional respect, though I suspect there was something underneath it that I did not have the cultural framework to read. Don't cross into any marked zones without asking me first." "Understood," Den said. He turned to our unit and began giving orders. For the first time since we had entered this bay, they felt like the right orders. Revised human survival probability, 96%. I discarded the model. It had been wrong at every interval. I was not qualified to build a probability model for humans. The Werk withdrew fully within 40 minutes. Not a rout. Werk do not rout. They made a tactical assessment, which is simply a more dignified phrase for the same thing, and moved back through their breach point in an organized retreat that preserved their remaining numbers. 7 of them made it back through. The apex was not among them. The apex remained where Voss had put it, in 4.2 standard gravity, alive and presumably engaged in considerable reflection. We held the breach corridor. The Werk tested it twice and did not test it a third time. When the station's emergency stabilizers finally engaged, 3 hours later, when the repair drones Voss had quietly dispatched at the beginning of the engagement finished their work on the primary gravity array, the platform stopped its descent and held at a stable altitude above the gas giant's upper band. Not safe, not rescue, but stable, which in this context was a word that meant alive. I found Voss in the cargo bay afterward. She was sitting on the floor near the gravity anchor she had thrown at the wall, the device in her lap, examining it, not for damage. I realized after a moment that she was recalibrating it, resetting it back to its original factory specifications, returning it to mining equipment, as though the last several hours had been a temporary reclassification rather than the thing that had saved all of our lives. "Sergeant Voss," I said. "Kreth Zal," she said. I had not told her my name. I noted this and decided to ask about it later, which is to say, I decided to never ask about it, because I suspected the answer would require me to revise something fundamental about my understanding of human attentiveness. "I was maintaining a probability model," I said, "of your survival odds throughout the engagement." She looked up. What were they at the start? 12%. She made a sound. I have since determined this sound is what humans produce when they find something ironic rather than funny. "Yeah," she said, "that sounds about right." "I was wrong at every interval," I said. "Every revision I made was insufficient. I could not build an accurate model because I did not understand the variable." She waited. "Gravity," I said. Your species, you treat it as information. The Werk treat it as an obstacle. I considered this, the Krell born in deep water, shaped by pressure, dense and slow and difficult to kill. We treat it as a constant, a given, the thing that is always there so we never had to think about it. Voss looked at the anchor in her hands. "You know what they made us do in basic training," she said. "Krell basic, human basic, all of it." She was not really asking me. "They train you in controlled environments, stable gravity, predictable floor. The whole point is to remove variables so you can learn the fundamentals without distraction." She turned the anchor over in her hands. 11 years I spent on stations, on ships, on installations where the gravity was always exactly where it was supposed to be, and I hated it. Every posting, too controlled, too predictable. She set the anchor down. My crew spent the last 3 rotations on Verath 9, which has the most unreliable gravity plating in the sector because the maintenance budget is a catastrophe. Everyone complained, filed reports, requested transfers. She looked up at me. "None of them came through," she said. Submarshal Den appeared in the cargo bay entrance. He stood for a moment, looking at the space, the channels, the rigged plating, the pinned apex in its gravity pocket, his own soldiers moving through it with the careful, consulted movements of people who have learned to ask before they step. He looked like a Krell who had been handed a new model of the universe and was still comparing it to the old one. "The breach is sealed," he said. "Good," said Voss. "When rescue comes," he said, "I will be including a full observer account of this engagement in my report." He paused. "I want to ensure it is accurate." Voss nodded. One question, Den said. At the beginning, you crossed Section 7, the Cascade Failure Corridor. Breck, our soldier, could not pass through it. He gestured back toward the corridor in question, the direction we had all come from, the corridor that should have been impassable. How did you cross it? Voss thought about this for a moment, not because she didn't know the answer. The pause was something else, the pause of someone deciding how much of the answer to give. You have to know which way down is going to be in 3 seconds, she said finally. Not which way it is now, the plates cycle. If you learn the cycle, you learn the floor. She picked up the gravity anchor and stood. Your soldier tried to cross it by knowing where the floor was. I crossed it by knowing where the floor was going to be. Den was quiet for a long time. This is a skill, he said, trainable. For humans, Voss said, we have the inner ear for it, the instinct. You, she glanced at Den's heavy Krell frame, the dense musculature, the low center of gravity that made him nearly impossible to knock down on flat terrain. You have other advantages. Den looked at his hands, the thick, pressure-hardened hands of a species that evolved in crushing depths, that had never needed to worry about which way it would fall because it was almost impossible to knock down and almost impossible to crush and almost impossible to drown. A species that had treated gravity as furniture, present, unremarkable, beneath consideration. We never learned to read it, he said. No, Voss said, you never had to. Webb appeared at the far end of the bay, pry bar over one shoulder, nodding at Voss in the way that I had learned meant done, no complications. She nodded back. Rolf was already dismantling the sensor array he had been reading from his rig, methodical, unhurried, converting the combat station back into a monitoring station with the efficiency of someone who has done this before and will do it again. Chen and Tors were still at the junction box, still modifying. I watched them for a moment before I understood they were not converting it back. They were improving it. The trap they had built in 6 hours of preparation, they were now making faster, more precise, more controllable. You're not resetting it, I said. Chen looked at me. Why would we reset it? The engagement is over. Tors smiled at the junction box in the way that technical people smile at problems they have partially solved and are now solving more completely. This engagement is over, she said. I recorded this in my log. I recorded the entire engagement in my log, every probability estimate, every revision, every moment I was wrong, which was most of them. When I filed the report, I attached a note for the Krell Continuance's Strategic Analysis Division, marked for senior review, which read as follows. Human probability modeling using standard metrics is not viable. Their performance advantage in variable gravity environments is not a tactic. It is a deeply embedded sensory and cognitive orientation that has no equivalent in Krell biology. Recommend immediate review of all joint operation protocols in which gravity stability is assumed. Recommend further study. Recommend extreme caution before fighting against humans in any environment where the floor is not where it was 5 seconds ago. I paused before sending it. Then I added one more line. The thing that inconveniences a species in comfort does not disappear when comfort ends. It becomes what they know. It becomes what they are. The humans were not lucky. They were practiced at surviving conditions we had classified as problems. They had been surviving that specific problem, that exact broken, unreliable, maddening problem for 3 full rotations. We called their posting a maintenance failure. They called it training.